Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Dina McFeeters, and I'm honored to serve as Associate Minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all that you are carrying with you today and all that your heart longs to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to guests joining us today. If you are visiting for the first time or just joining us from afar, why don't you say hello in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from. I welcome you to our worship service by inviting you to repeat our mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. As we explore the theme of promise this morning, I offer these opening words by the poet David Whyte, to make a promise. Make a place of prayer. No fuss, just lean into the white brilliance and say what you needed to say all along. Nothing too much. Words as simple as yours and as heard as the bird song above your head or the river running gently beside you. Let your words join one to another, the way stone nestles on stone, the way water just leaves and goes to the sea, the way your promise breathes and belongs with every other promise the world has ever made. Now let them go on. Leave your words to carry their own life. Without you, let the promise go with the river. Have faith. Walk away. Let's return to our beloved sanctuary for the lighting of the flaming chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Will you join me in a time of meditation and centering? And as we enter into this time of spoken meditation, followed by silence, followed by singing Spirit of Life, I invite you to find a way wherever you are to ground and center yourself, whatever that means to you. Perhaps you'd like to put your feet on the floor. Maybe find a way to lift your spine so you can breathe more freely. And notice where in your body you can find a resting place. This spoken meditation is by Elizabeth Buki. It's called A World of Beauty and Love is Coming. Spirit of life, life which holds us. We gather in reverence and thanks for you. We are grateful for the gift of another breath and for each moment of connection beauty, and truth. Cry with us in our pain for our world. Remind us that we are loved just as we are. Remind us that we are connected with all that is. Remind us that we do not journey alone. Give us what we need for today. Call us back to our promises, commitments, and values. Help us love ourselves and each other, and to show that love in our actions. Make us instruments of justice, equity, and compassion. Free us from all that is evil. We declare that life and love are stronger than tyranny and fear, that a world of beauty and love is coming, and we must shape it together. May it be so, and amen.
Good morning. My name is Amy Wilborn, and I am delighted to serve as your worship associate this morning. Make sure to take a few moments after the service to stop by coffee hour and say hello. When I became a mom, I made a promise to each of my children that I would do my very best to protect them from harm. I logically knew that I was making a promise that I could never keep, but I was holding a light up to who I wanted to be as a parent. There have been many promises that I have made and broken as a parent since then. Sometimes those promises have been transactional. I promised to let you play video games if you cleaned up your room. Or you can have a dessert if you just try a bite of that broccoli. I had more leverage back then when they were little. As they got older, I tried to teach them that they should always keep their promises or they would lose people's trust, including mine. I tried to set an example by keeping my own promises and continued to aspire to keep my promise to protect. Then the pandemic came along. Like most everyone else, our lives, full of school and work and activities, stopped abruptly. Virtual school was not ideal for my 16-year-old, but he made it through the rest of that first year with passing grades. Not long into year 2 of virtual school, it became clear that the format was not working for him. He would log in, but not participate or do homework. He began to feel like a failure, and that failure only created more of an obstacle because he felt so far behind. He would make and break promises to improve all the time, and it began to eat away at his self-esteem. I grew frustrated and worried and applied more and more pressure, as did his teachers. As much as he tried to engage with online learning, he just could not. Another thing I had promised for my son seemed to be fading away, a promising future. I felt like it was my job as a parent to make sure that he was successful in school, despite the unprecedented circumstances. I wanted him to be engaged in a formative high school that none of us had ever known or experienced before. I wanted him to be thinking about college when he was not even feeling connected to school. He wasn't able to envision a future in the stagnant and isolated state of pandemic life. My promise to protect wasn't working. Eventually, I let go of the struggle and allowed him to try and figure it out on his own. He got a summer job that made him feel a sense of accomplishment. His self-esteem improved, and he began to see a different path for himself. He learned valuable things about himself during the pandemic, things that no lesson in school could ever have taught him. He learned that society's expectations, schools' expectations, and even one's own parents' expectations are not always in line with what an individual needs, what he needed. I decided to step back, listen, be present, and let the chips fall. As he heads into his senior year of high school, we won't be looking at colleges, and I do feel a small sense of loss about that. But he's looking into careers that will fit his need to use his hands, which he discovered while working his new job. He talks about his future now and feels a sense of confidence that he never felt academically. In the end, my son held up a light to me. The promise I should have been making from the start, and the promise that I have made to him since, is to be present to what he is asking for and what he needs, and to trust that he and the universe will figure it out.
May I ever use my hands for lifting up. May I ever use my voice for speaking truth. May I consecrate each day and live with joy and wonder. May I sow in peace as all the wild things do. I will ever use my voice for lifting up. This voice was made for peace. I will ever use my eyes for seeking truth. These eyes were made for truth. I will consecrate each day and live with joy and wonder. I will sow in peace as all the wild things do. There is peace on I will reap in peace as all the wild things do. Wild and precious, we are wild and precious. Life is wild and precious.
Thank you, Leah. 20th century Unitarian theologian and ethicist James Luther Adams said about human beings, "We are promise making, promise keeping, promise breaking, promise renewing creatures." I appreciate his articulation of what happens after we make a promise. We keep it or we break it, and sometimes we renew it. When we are children, there's a period in our maturing sense of what it means to have friends, to be in relationship with others, when we demand promises. If someone says they will do or not do something, a child demands their loyalty with the one word challenge: promise? Then often comes a phrase to bind the promise, like cross your heart and hope to die, or other dire warnings of consequences. Making a promise builds expectation that it will be carried out. And yet, perhaps especially as children, we have an innate sense that it might not come true. There is potential in a promise, and then there is reality. Will this person be true to their word? Can I trust them? When I make a promise to someone, the subtext of that promise is a request for them to trust me. Our Soul Matters packet on the theme of promise states, when we make a promise, we are saying, you can count on me to, then you fill in the blank. You can count on me to. When was the last time you said to someone, you can count on me to? I can't remember the last time I made a promise so explicitly. I usually promise to do things or not do things by saying I will or I will not. For example, I will send that email, or I will not attend that meeting. I will harvest carrots for you. I will not foist my alligator-sized zucchini upon you. To indicate the seriousness of a promise, we might say, I give you my word. Wendell Berry wrote in an essay called Standing by Words, the idea of standing by one's word, of words precisely designating things, of deeds faithful to words, is probably native to our understanding. I appreciate his phrase, deeds faithful to words. That's a good definition of a promise. We promise that our deeds will be faithful to our words. When we make a promise, we are making a commitment to a person or a community to follow through, that our deeds will be faithful to our words. We are also making a bid to be viewed as trustworthy, to be experienced as trustworthy. Indeed, the easiest way to build trust in a relationship is to make promises and keep them. The easiest way to break trust is to break promises. Yet it happens all the time, the breaking of promises. It's part of being human. So how do we handle that in relationships, in community? Sometimes people need to revise their promises or at least have ways to come back into integrity with each other. It's probably most effective to practice humility at the outset when we make promises to admit we will not be perfect and will need a way to come back into integrity. Saying your marriage vows is probably the most explicit personal promise made public. Writing your marriage vows or carefully selecting someone else's words that echo the reality you are creating together involves conversation. And it's the conversation more than the actual words that builds a living, breathing understanding and agreement between people. An exercise ministers often use when planning a wedding ceremony with a couple is to give them an assignment. Each person goes into a room alone to answer these questions. What do you want to promise to your partner? What do you want your partner to promise to you? Then they share those answers with each other and come to agreement on their vows. The wise minister will also ask the couple, how will you come back to your promises when they break? Our minister emeritus, Drew Kennedy, when crafting a wedding ceremony, would ask the couple if they wanted to include in their ceremony a simple ritual that honors the reality of difficulty in relationship and the need to remember the love behind their vows. He called it the Red Rose Pledge. If one member of a couple is out of harmony with the other and wants to bring to mind the love that undergirds their vows, that transcends any particular difficult issue in the marriage, they put a red rose in a vase in a specially appointed place in their home. I suppose the red rose could also signal a request for reconciliation. Promises are central to personal relationships and also to building community. Unitarian Universalists describe our spiritual community as covenantal, not creedal. The covenants we make in this congregation, for example, in our theme circles, our religious education classes, our staff, our ministers, our choir, the board of trustees, our social justice council, they're all promises for how we want to be with each other, authentically relating across cultural and theological differences. In a 2013 article in the UU World called Bound in Covenant, the Reverend Victoria Safford wrote, "Seeing ourselves as bound in covenant is an old practice among us. In 1630, John Winthrop, soon to become the first governor of Massachusetts, spoke to a soggy, stalwart band of fellow Puritans sailing with high and pious hopes aboard the Arabella toward a new life in New England. He said, 'Now the only way to avoid shipwreck and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities for the supply of others' necessities. We must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, Make others' conditions our own. Rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work, our community as members of the same body. So shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Safford writes, it was an extraordinary declaration of interdependence. Despite their stone-cold reputation, their caricatured intolerance, these were people who promised to bear each other's burdens as their own, to subvert their separate private interests, their superfluities, for the public good of all. Humbly, gently, patiently, they would serve a vision larger than any single eye could see. They would hold a larger hope. The only way to avoid shipwreck was to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, to make and keep a sacred covenant together. The organizing statements of the early Universalist and Unitarian congregations in New England echoed this Puritan ideal. The theology changed, Unitarian beliefs about the nature of God, Universalist beliefs about the nature of human beings, but the essential premises of covenanted community, the foundation of their polity, did not. What the Lord required and what the people needed from each other was willingness to meet their struggles in the plural voice. A covenant is not a contract, she continues. It is not made and signed and sealed once and for all, sent to the attorneys for safekeeping or guarded under glass in a museum. Covenant is not a static artifact, and it is not a sworn oath. Covenant is a living, breathing aspiration, made new every day. It can't be enforced by consequences, but it may be reinforced by forgiveness and by grace when we stumble, when we forget, when we mess up. Every Sunday in my congregation, we repeat in unison the affirmation the Unitarian minister James Philip Blake wrote for the church he served in Evanston, Illinois in 1894. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Each week, quietly, aloud, she said, I promise that I will dwell in peace. And then I don't live peacefully at all. By Monday afternoon or Tuesday at the latest, I'm living fearfully again, or acting meanly, or self-servingly. I say that I will seek the truth in love, and then proceed to act quite otherwise, closing my ears and shutting my open mind and heart, seeking instead the validation of my own narrow, safe opinion. I say our great covenant is to help one another, and then I forget to do it. Reverend Safford articulates so well both the inspiration of covenant, the potential in the promise, and the reality of daily life, the inevitability of falling short. One of the common agreements in our small group covenants at First Church is that we will not interrupt when someone else is speaking. Practicing the art of listening builds trust, helps us get to know each other on a deeper level, and helps the speaker hear their own thoughts and find their own truth. Listening also helps us embody UU principle number 1, We affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Personally, I'm all in with this agreement. I hate being interrupted. I grew up in a white Midwestern culture where jumping in on each other's words is considered rude. I typically have pauses in my speech pattern while I'm collecting my thoughts and choosing my words. So I am often interrupted. I'm also a short female in a patriarchal society, so I am often interrupted. Imagine my surprise when I found myself suddenly interrupting someone else in a small group last year. My interruption rattled the group. It rattled me. I interrupted because I thought what someone was saying or about to say could cause harm. Because of the choice I made to interrupt, which broke our covenant, our group needed to process the experience later and renew our covenant. It turned out I was wrong. The speaker was not going to cause harm. But over the months since then, I've wondered about our common understanding regarding interruptions. If we promise to not interrupt, and we hold that promise sacred as a community, what if someone does say something harmful in a group? Do we sit back and let it happen? Well, that doesn't make sense, because then not only would we be allowing harm to happen, we'd be violating both our UU principle number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and our UU principle number 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. On the Unitarian Universalist website called Side with Love, conversation on covenant between Elizabeth Wynn and Nora Rasman was published in 2017. I'm going to share an excerpt from that conversation on covenant. Elizabeth said, I resonate with my understanding of Shinto purification rituals. The assumption is that we are always coming out of harmony with nature, and rituals purify us and bring us back into harmony. There's nothing wrong with being out of harmony. It's part of the cycle. What if we understood covenant that way? Nora said, yes, indeed. We don't have a lot of examples of breaking covenant that model humility, transparency, and accountability. In many of the social justice spaces that I've been part of, she said, we often conflate a broken covenant with being a broken human. That feels really different than the way you describe the rituals of Shinto, where there isn't necessarily value being placed on one being out of harmony. Elizabeth said, yes, when it's working, covenant offers a way of handling harm that affirms the inherent worth of all people and also affirms our ability to move through conflict and confession and be offered assurance and an opportunity for repair. Wynn and Rasman's conversation on covenant from 4 years ago supports my sense that it may be time to revise how we make small group covenants at First Church in light of inherited privilege, marginalized identities, and the power dynamics therein. Our collective commitment to the work of anti-racism may require a shift in our promises. Sometimes there are things that need to be interrupted, and we break trust with people who hold marginalized identities when we do not interrupt harm. I titled this sermon Potential and Reality because every reality holds potential, and every potential is embedded in reality. It's not potential versus reality. Potential and reality are a living, breathing process. And our promise making, promise keeping, promise breaking, promise renewing behavior as human beings in community embody reality and potential in every moment. We are now, of course, in a vivid moment of interplay between potential and reality at this point in the COVID-19 global pandemic. The potential of vaccines and the reality of the Delta variant surge means society is not getting back to normal as quickly as we may have hoped. Church is not getting back to normal as quickly as we may have hoped. But, and I'm not the first person to ask this, what is normal? And do we really want it? Or is it time to create a new normal, a better one? One of the things that I grieve during virtual church is how I've lost the tangible sense of First Church as a group body. We make promises to each other as a community of bodies when we dedicate ourselves to raise our children in the faith during the child dedication ceremony. We make promises to each other when we welcome new members in our new member ceremony. We enter into solemn and joyful covenant when we ordain or install a new minister. It can be hard to live those promises when we do not have each other in our three-dimensional wholeness. We must remember that our promise making happens in forward motion, in aspiration toward the future. We will get there. Wendell Berry ends his essay, Standing by Words, like this. I come in conclusion to the difference between projecting the future and making a promise. The projecting of futurologists uses the future as the safest possible context for whatever is desired. It binds one only to selfish interest. But making a promise binds one to someone else's future. If the promise is serious enough, one is brought to it by love and in awe and fear. Fear, awe, and love bind us to no selfish aims, but to each other. For when we promise in love and awe and fear, there is a certain kind of mobility that we give up. We give up the romanticism of progress. We are speaking where we stand, and we shall stand afterwards in the presence of what we have said. Friends, our promises bind us to each other. Our collective promise binds us to our community's dream. Believing our promises' potential in the midst of reality is an act of faith. I ask you to keep the faith. For the promises we make at First Church bind us to someone else's future, not merely our own.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them gardens instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll be a land building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring ruins of generations. Oh, we'll build a land of people so bold. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come, build a land where the mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come, build the land, my people we seek. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
Thank you all so much for your generosity. Pledges are the core of our church's spiritual practice of generosity. And we're also grateful for additional gifts to support our ministry. And we thank the folks out there who are appreciating this online ministry and supporting it by texting 73256 with the message, where did the message go? Give to you. Or you can come back later and give on our website. Your gifts truly help us continue to provide this ministry. We also share the plate with an organization each month. The nonprofit Nehemiah Project is our summer Share the Plate recipient. With 2 facilities in Milwaukee, the Nehemiah Project works with teens and young men 13 to 20 years old who have served their sentence and are preparing to return to their families. Its mission is to promote the physical and emotional well-being of youth through psychological, educational, leadership, and transitional living spaces and services in a residential community. They accept clothing items, furniture, financial donations, and offer volunteer opportunities. To make a donation directly to the Nehemiah Project, please visit their website. They also accept donations over the phone. You can see all these options on your screen now, and they will live on in the YouTube comments section of this video after worship is over. Thank you so much for giving right now or when you come back later. Your support keeps us and our community partners going. Thank you. I also want to thank Amy Wilborn, our worship associate today, for her story and for bringing my attention to this poem by David Whyte. The closing words are also by the poet David Whyte, but first, an author's note. He wrote this poem to make a promise, sometimes lives under the title, To Break a Promise. As to my mind, both the making and breaking of promises involve exactly the same combination of absolute presence and radical letting go. Here's his poem, To Break a Promise. Make a place of prayer, no fuss. Just lean into the white brilliance and say what you needed to say all along. Nothing too much. Words as simple as yours and as heard as the bird song above your head or the river running gently beside you. Let your words join one to another the way stone nestles on stone, the way water just leaves and goes to the sea, the way your promise breathes and belongs with every other promise the world has ever made. Now, let them go on. Leave your words to carry their own life without you. Let the promise go with the river. Have faith. Walk away.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. 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 Whoa, yeah, yeah.